All right, last session of the day. That's a great spot. Now, wasn't sure how many people were going to show up, so appreciate you here. We'll try to make it, I'm going to try to make it meaningful and educational, so you walk away with something great for having stayed here through the last session. I'm going to be talking about how you can use customer insights to get more out of your marketing dollars. I know I saw on the agenda there were a couple other sessions around analytics. Hopefully some of the things I will say will complement that and will help you as we go through it. We're living in a time where consumers are just being overwhelmed with content, not just in one channel, like some of you have been to New York Times, to Times Square in New York, have seen it, but across all the channels. And what that's doing is that is really reducing the window of opportunity, as I see it, for you as a marketer, especially a digital marketer, to reach, engage, and hopefully convert that customer. That window is shrinking because of the amount of content that consumers like yourself and myself are getting. I read a study, I think a couple of studies over the last year, where the consumer's attention span for reading some of the content across all the various channels is no more than 5 to 7 seconds. 5 to 7 seconds, you've got to get their attention, so your message has to be right, and you better be reaching them to the right channel, otherwise they're probably not going to read what you're selling them or what you're trying to market your product. So you have market pressures going on because of all the stuff, and I really don't envy many of you here. It is getting harder. It is getting harder to reach these customers. Yeah, there are more opportunities, but it's also getting harder. While that's happening, you also got internal pressures. You got these CFOs that are wanting to say, what are you doing with the marketing dollars that's contributing to the top line and the bottom line? It's great that we need to make the consumers aware of our brand. We need to get positive sentiment about a brand, but what are you doing in terms of top line and bottom line? And I'm going to use CFOs because I don't want to make the CEOs the bad guys, because that makes me look bad too. So those darn CFOs. There was a study that I just saw probably about 7 months ago, the first time I've seen a study like that, where they polled CFOs and CMOs. That was one of the interesting part, on what their perception was of digital marketing. Fairly recent, about 8 to 10 months ago. And out of the respondents, nearly 1/3, could be a CMO or CFO, felt that digital marketing is still viewed as a cost center, not as a revenue center, like IT, like finance. That really, you should pause, because that really should not be the case. They should view digital marketing as a revenue center. And why are they viewing that way? They probably are because they don't understand how the efforts that you're doing are contributing to the top line and bottom line. They like top line, but they even like the bottom line even better. And because of that, another thing I saw, and there's the metrics they felt that they were given by digital marketers were not directly related that measures the outcome, the successful outcome of how much revenue you added to the organization. So while you're going through that, and one of the things, as I visit customers and I talk to a lot of organizations, what I've noticed in the last probably year, I don't think I'd talked to CFOs as much as I've done with CMOs, and that study sort of substantiated that for me. You guys are going through a lot of additional challenges as you're trying to get your product that you're priced with your budgets to try to reach consumers. And there are a lot of challenges you're going to go through. I'm not going to talk about the structure, the strategy, the customer experience, the people here who you've probably listened to over the last 2 days that have probably given you better insights into that. I'm going to talk about how can you use the data that exists both within your organization and outside that you can use to generate very meaningful and relevant insights. Why? So then you can talk to me as a consumer in a more personable manner that I will react in a favorable way when I get that communication across whatever channel for the 5 to 7 seconds, and I will be engaged and hopefully convert. And then when you do all of that, the CFOs want to know, how well did you do? That's where the measurement comes in. Last but not least, I heard a couple speakers today talk about the whole concept of privacy. For marketers, digital marketers included, Privacy is becoming a big issue because not only of GDPR if you have a presence outside the U.S., but CCPA if you have a presence in California. And 2020, I think, is going to be a very interesting year from that perspective, especially if you have data and you use data for your marketing efforts, because not only CCPA is coming at it, but right now, 14 other states have privacy laws that are in different stages of review by the legislatures. 14 different states. In the absence of a federal mandate, that's what we're looking at. And that's going to create a very, very interesting 2020, I believe, for marketers. So let's get started. As you're trying to figure out how to do customer insights so you can reach the customers, you can generate ROI, the question I always start with, do you know your customers? And I think the answer is pretty much everybody in this room probably knows their customers at some level. But what I really should be asking is, do you really know your customers? Everybody probably knows the demographics, age, gender, ethnicity, marital status, but do you know their interests? What do they like to do? What are their behaviors? Where do they like to buy? What are the motivations that's enabling them to buy the products through your all the digital channels? And where do they fit in the socioeconomic status? All of that information can be pulled together. And the marketers like Amazon and Facebook, they do a lot of this that I'm sharing with you on this slide. And not only what the other point I'd like to make on the slide is, don't do it just in point in time. Do it periodically, because consumers go through different stages, whether it's demographic, whether it's behaviors, they change. And as they change, your messaging to them has to change. A great case study that I share when I do some of these speeches, we still have a customer over the last 3 or 4 years. It's a media company. They've migrated a lot of the content from the print to digital. Everything that they evolved that a couple years ago. Their customer that really bought that access to that media, the content in the print world, has been the same for about 5 years prior to about 2 years ago. Was predominantly a 45 to 55-year-old male, predominantly white, across a couple states, mainly in the Northeast. Interests were around travel and world news. That demographic moved to the digital platform as they put more and more stuff on the digital platform. But then they started seeing an explosion of more consumers on the digital platform that they converted. And we then took those consumers, those customers, and tried to create a profile for them. And it was interesting that while the initial profile stayed intact, they still had those customers on the digital platform were dwarfed by another profile that was buying their product more online than the existing product. And that profile was a 25 to 35-year-old female, multi-ethnic, across the whole country. Can you imagine what they had to do from a marketing perspective? It's a completely different marketing strategy. But if you don't have an understanding of that, and you assume that your customer profile that you have, that was 2 years ago, is still the case, it's not the case. Consumers are changing, their behaviors are changing, different consumers are coming in, and it's very important that you understand who you're considering with, because that's the heart of the marketing. And it all starts with data. Again, numerous speakers have talked about data, the importance of data. And data is being collected within your organization, all across the organization. I call that zero first-party data. And I'll define that in the next slide in a minute. You're collecting that. I'll be shocked if not everybody, pretty much everybody in the room is already doing that in some shape, form, or manner. But bringing it together and enhancing it with data that's available out in the ecosystem outside your company, stitching it together to understand the identity of that customer across all the channels, storing it in Excel, database, customer data platforms, whatever you want to call it. That's how it all begins. That's when you go in this customer insight journey, it has to start with that. And it starts with data that's coming across from all your channels. The customer is interacting with your brand across a multitude of channels, digital, a lot of them digital and non-digital. And when I travel, whether it's a hotel or it's an air or a car, I'm going on the website. I'm going on the mobile app. I'm going on to calling the brand if I have an issue. There's a lot of ways that I'm communicating with the brand, and when I'm doing that, I'm leaving a breadcrumb about either some of my interests, perhaps my behaviors, or what I'm going to be doing that the other channels don't know about. And if you don't stitch it together, you don't have a good view of the customer insight that you have to use to effectively do marketing. One of the things that as you go through that, this is a great slide that I used from Forrester. I used it a couple of years ago and it really resonated with me, is there are 4 different kinds of data. The first party data that everybody probably here understands, that's what you have within your organization with a customer talking to you. Then you have second party data, which is by organizations through surveys, co-ops, different parts of the ecosystem that collect the data. And then you have the most common one, which is third-party data that is inferred based on transactions that we all do, unfortunately, and is inferred and sold. And then last but not least is the zero-party. This is going to become even more important in the post-customer CCPA and customer privacy world, where you are going to want to communicate with your customer to understand what they want, how they want you to communicate with them, what they want you to communicate with them, so that way you are actually giving them control of the data. That is where we're going. And if you're a digital marketer, you have to understand that, because if you don't, the ramifications on the back end, as some of the organizations who are seeing violations in GDPR are significant. So you really need to understand all the different aspects of data. Each of these plays a role in insights, and you need to bring that in to help you formulate great insights. As I said, first-party data is owned primarily by you guys. You have it within your systems. It's spread out, second-party and third-party, and the zero-party data we talked about. What do you do when you have all this data? Now comes the hard part. You have this data like a puzzle sitting all over the organization, and you gotta put it together. You know, having put puzzles together when I was young, it's no fun. And stitching this data is also hard work. And this is the part that I find trips up a lot of customers. Because when you're taking data from multiple systems, it is very disjointed. And you have to put it together. You've got to look at identifiers. You got customer names and some from some aspects of your channels. You got phone numbers. You got the social media handles. You got the IP addresses. You got to put that together so you can really stitch a good identity of the customer. And every puzzle helps. And I see organizations that do this, they're going to use this as a strategic advantage. And they will be able to come after consumers like all of us in a much better manner, because they understand what we're doing across all the channels, not that one channel, and be able to communicate with us. And that's once you've put it together, now I'm going into the next step, which some of you may be already doing, is which I call advanced analytics. Everybody's probably got reports, dashboards, metrics that are probably giving you the information you need. What I want to talk about is how do you use the data to predict the future. And why is it so hard? It's hard because you really need skill sets that are very hard to find and hard to hire. A lot of time when I talk to organizations, the larger ones are able to hire that. The smaller ones, it's really hard for them to find the right tools and the right people. And sometimes when the insights are given, they're either not relevant, they're not meaningful. So one of the things as marketers, what I want to do, educate you guys, is you really need to look at these some of the things that customers are saying, because analytics has sort of stayed about stable, and it really, the organizations that are growing it are the ones that are going to lead in this space. What should you do in terms of analytics? Well, it depends what you're trying to do. What's your business strategy? What's your marketing strategy? Are you trying to acquire customers, or are you trying to keep customers? You're losing too many customers. Are you trying to take those one and done customers and you're trying to make them more? Or are you trying to get your repeat customers who are buying a lot, but they're not loyal? You want to get them to a loyalty program, because then you can get the higher chance of retention. It depends on what you're doing. We have customers who are on the acquisition side. All they care about is acquisition. We have a customer who's doing great acquisition, but you've got way too much churn. And so they're trying to stamp that. Because each of these requires different analytics. If you're trying to prevent your loyal customers from leaving, you probably want to do some attrition risk modeling. So you want to see who has a higher propensity to leave, so then you can make them an offer, or you can communicate with them that entices them to continue staying rather than leave. And there are triggers based on all this data that you can put together to identify that. If you're going in acquisition, I'm sure some of you are doing clone modeling, trying to find other areas, other customers that are similar to customers that you have, as well as segmentation. The last part of the journey, once you've done all of that, is now how do you stitch it all together and target those customers, manage the journey across all the channels, and engage and activate them. Because that's really what it's all about. You know, pulling the data in, generating insights is great, but it's not valuable if I can't get the customer conversions, which is what my internal executive team is looking for. Everybody's probably very familiar with segmentation. It's just breaking up all the population of consumers into common characteristics that identify how they buy the product, their behaviors, interests are similar. The trend has become from trying to create large audiences to very, very micro audiences. An example is here. For one of the customers, we had created a segmentation, and they were trying to identify more of their customers that were buying online. This was a women's apparel company. And so we were able to find 2.1% of the US population that had very similar characteristics. They shopped online, they used social media to, that was a key crux for them, how they were impacted by the influencers. Because we knew they've shopped online and they pretty much shopped on trend, not on price, not on brand, you can actually then target your message to that segment with that viewpoint in mind, and you have a higher chance of getting them to listen to what you're trying to say, because that's what, based on the behaviors and interests, we have identified them as a segment that's relevant to what you're trying to position your product. Once you've done the segmentation, a customer's journey is very complicated. You know, you could say we get emails. You know, I'll use myself as an example. I got an email, probably read it, didn't do anything. They followed up with a direct mail. Great, looked at it, probably didn't buy anything. Went to a store, looked at it. Maybe I can get a better deal on the website. Went back, checked the website out. Now, probably not ready to make a decision because I'm online, retargeted, it's following me. Then I go back to the website when I'm ready to buy. Again, looked at the product, but they decided I wanted to see some customer comments and see how their social media, what the social media feedback is on the site, liked it, and I ended up buying the product. That's really what's happening today. When a customer is engaging with you, they're going through numerous journeys to get to that point, not just the social media platform, not just the website. And knowing that is very important. And you cannot know this unless you stitch the identity together. That's the key point. That's why that's such a hard step. But you have to get this identity together. Because if you do that, then you can deconstruct that journey, the journey that we went through when the customer went through all the different channels. And this is the conversation I see a lot of marketers having right now, is how do I understand which of these channels that the buy happened to can I attribute it to? And you can't do that. The most common word that you probably hear is a multi-touch attribution. You cannot do that until you have stitched the identity together. But when you stitch it together, the whole premise is to understand what contributed to that $100 purchase. So that way, the next step is you understand the marketing spend that you've allocated across the channel, which channel is really impacting it. This is what your CFO is looking for. This is what your CEO is going to be looking for. This is what brands are getting to. The accountability that exists in other parts of the organization, I see it coming down very significantly in the marketing area. And organizations that will be able to do this will definitely have a competitive edge in the marketplace. Once you do all these campaigns, you understand the journey, you manage the journey, you do it. Now you have to, you want to go and engage and activate the customer. In some cases, you don't know the customers. They're still anonymous. They're visiting your platforms, but they're not identifying themselves. There are others who are identified. They've made themselves known to you. And again, because we're stitching it together for some of the anonymous individuals, we know the device IDs, we know other attributes, we can position that we can drive to them with a certain message and a certain audience that allows you to capture those customers. The last part of this whole journey that you probably need to go if you're going to really leverage customer insights to drive value from the marketing dollars is the measurement piece. And this piece is the hardest. This is the hardest piece. I really should have his hair should be actually on fire. But you know, it's bad enough he's pulling it out. And why is it hard? Because you have to get in this multi-channel world that is real, that's what we're living in. You have to get the data from all over the place. You have to get the transactional data, the customer data, you got to get the data from the website, from the tags, you have to get the identity resolution, stitch it together, you got to attribute it, and then you have to figure out where is all this information that is allowing us to understand where our spend is meaningful and where it's waste. We've had situations where I've talked to some of the CFMOs, and they truly are not of this world, but they still understand because what the CFO wants, and they're trying to identify that waste in marketing spend because the marketing dollars are not significantly increasing. They are being asked to do more and more with what the marketing dollars they have. And if you cannot do marketing measurement in an impactful way, it's going to make it very hard to actually provide that information to the CFO. So in wrapping up, just want to go through it. You probably are analyzing the data that's coming in from all your channels, pull it together into a platform that you can understand, what you can afford, whatever you can do. And one of the things on the second and third party data that I didn't talk about, I don't think I've come across a customer yet that doesn't either have enough data or just has too much data they're procuring. And even if you have too much data you're procuring, that's a problem. Because in a post-CCPA world, you're going to make sure you're going to be liable for that data. So you have to make sure you only take the data that you need to analyze from out there, because otherwise, because it's in your environment, you're liable for that. Then you bring it in, you analyze report, you model it. Once you've identified customers that match your life cycle of what you're trying to do, look for audiences out there that are similar or like your customers that have a higher propensity to buy, and so you can use the dollars wisely rather than sending it to 100,000 of those consumers. You could go to 20 and get a better rate of return. Orchestrate the journey by understanding how the customer goes across all the platforms, and then making sure you engage and activate in those platforms, whether it's social media, whether it's on display, whether it's email that they're interested in. This is the journey you want to go on, and then the measurement piece that I wrapped up with. That's fairly important to make sure that you can actually measure what this is going to, because without measurement, it again is just another effort in collecting data, targeting, but you don't know where you're spending it wisely and where there's waste. So I wanted to wrap that up, and I really appreciate this is the last session. Appreciate everybody staying, and hopefully you learned something from this that you can go back into your organizations and something to give you fodder for thought. So thank you very much. I'll be back up here if anybody wants to stop by, ask questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.